Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers through calm authority. And sometimes the most powerful man in the room is not the one shouting, but the one who simply says, "Stop everything." Today's story is about a father who did exactly that. A man who watched the world humiliate his daughters, and in a single, silent order, made the entire sky freeze. Welcome to a true story of race, power, and love. The day an airline CEO shut down his own empire because two little girls were told they didn't belong. Now, before we dive in, think about this. How many times have people been treated differently because of how they look, dress, or sound? How often does prejudice hide behind a policy? Most people stay quiet, walk away, and tell themselves it's not worth the fight. But this man, this father, chose not to stay silent. He didn't send a tweet. He didn't call for revenge. He acted instantly, and in doing so, he exposed an entire system that had forgotten its humanity. This story divided the internet. Some said he went too far, grounding every flight across the nation just because of a personal incident. Others said he did exactly what a father should do, protect his children from a world that still can't see them as equals. Whichever side you're on, one thing is undeniable. What happened that morning at Gate 27 changed the aviation industry forever. Let's rewind to that morning. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight from Atlanta to Chicago. The terminal buzzed with travelers sipping overpriced coffee, families juggling suitcases, and business people glued to their screens. Among them were two little girls, Amira and Amina, identical twins, 10 years old, wearing matching pink backpacks and smiles that could light up the entire concourse. They were traveling with their aunt Denise, a nurse who had taken time off work to take them on their first airplane trip. Their father had arranged everything: tickets in business class, checked luggage, meal preferences, even a small surprise waiting for them in Chicago. He wanted them to see the world. He wanted them to know they belonged in every space. But sometimes the world has other plans. As they approached the boarding gate, Denise handed over the passports and digital tickets. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman in a crisp Navy uniform, scanned them and paused. She looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "These are business class tickets," she said slowly. "Are you sure they're yours?" Denise blinked, confused. "Yes, ma'am. Purchased under their father's account." The agent's smile stiffened. "And where is their father?" "At work," Denise said, still polite. "He couldn't make it today." The woman tilted her head, skepticism heavy in her tone. "Do you have proof of purchase?" These looked unusual. Behind them, the line of passengers grew restless. Some sighed loudly. Others glanced over, curious. A security officer wandered closer. Denise felt a chill creep up her spine. She knew what was happening, but she hoped she was wrong. "I can show you the email confirmation," she offered. But the agent had already turned toward her coworker, whispering, gesturing, a quick exchange of glances that carried years of silent bias. The twins clutched each other's hands. They didn't understand what was wrong, only that everyone was staring. Within minutes, a supervisor arrived. Another round of questions. Another round, "Are you sure?" "And these seats aren't cheap." Denise's patience broke. "Is there a problem because we're black?" she asked quietly. The air went still. The supervisor frowned. "Ma'am, please don't make this about race. We're just verifying information." But the verification never ended. The girls stood there for 15 long minutes, watching other passengers board, listening to whispers and chuckles, their excitement draining away. One of them whispered, "Auntie, are we in trouble?" And that's when Denise realized they weren't just being questioned. They were being humiliated. Someone behind them muttered, "Maybe they're in the wrong line." Another said, "Business class?" Seriously, it wasn't just discrimination, it was public shaming. Denise asked for a manager. The agent rolled her eyes. Security moved closer. Phones came out. People began recording. The story that would soon shake the entire airline industry was about to begin. Now, while all this was unfolding, somewhere in a glass office above the runway, a man in a tailored suit was on a call with international partners. He was calm, composed, unaware that a few gates away, his daughters were being denied the right to board his own company's flight. That man was Marcus Hall, the CEO of Airline, a name that carried weight in every corner of the aviation world. A self-made executive who started as a mechanic, rose through the ranks, and became one of the few black CEOs in the history of American airlines. He believed in discipline, excellence, and fairness. But he also knew something that corporate America still struggles with. Bias doesn't disappear just because a company posts a diversity statement. When his assistant rushed in, face pale, holding a phone that showed a live video from Gate 27, he didn't believe it at first. But then he saw their faces. His girls, confused, hurt, holding on to each other. The call in his hand dropped. The room went silent. He didn't yell. He didn't demand explanations. He simply stood up, buttoned his jacket, and said 5 words to his operations director. Ground every flight. Right now. What happened next would leave the entire world stunned. Because in a matter of minutes, hundreds of aircraft were ordered back to gates. Pilots received emergency instructions. Passengers demanded answers. Social media exploded with one phrase trending worldwide. #grounded for justice. And while chaos unfolded outside, Marcus Hall walked calmly toward Gate 27. The man whose empire touched the clouds was about to confront the people who told his daughters they didn't belong among them. Marcus Hall's footsteps echoed through the marble hallways of the terminal. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of anger, but because of heartbreak. He had built this airline from the ground up, fought through boardroom politics, racial bias, and public scrutiny. He had endured everything except this. What was the point of leading a billion-dollar company if the people under his own roof still saw his daughters as outsiders? Airport staff moved out of his way, startled by the calm, steady expression on his face. His assistant trailed behind, frantically answering calls from operations control. "Sir, the media's already calling. They want to know why every flight is suspended." "Let them wait," Marcus said quietly. "For once, they'll hear the truth." When he arrived at Gate 27, the chaos had already peaked. Dozens of passengers were recording on their phones. The gate agents looked overwhelmed, defensive, whispering to security officers who stood uncertainly by. And in the middle of it all, 2 little girls, still holding hands, still trying not to cry. Marcus stopped a few steps away. The sight froze him. His daughter's small backpacks, one pink and one lavender, leaned against the wall. The excitement in their eyes was gone, replaced by confusion and shame. He took a deep breath. Every camera turned toward him as the CEO of the airline stepped into the frame. The whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's Marcus Hall." "Wait, the Marcus Hall? Oh my God, he's their father." The gate agent's face drained of color. She recognized him immediately. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain herself, but no words came out. Marcus looked at her, not with rage, but with the kind of quiet disappointment that cuts deeper than any shout. He knelt down in front of his daughters, ignoring the cameras. "What happened?" he asked softly. "Amina," the younger twin whispered. "They said our tickets were fake. And they laughed at us," Amira added, her voice breaking. Marcus closed his eyes. The noise around him blurred. The cameras, the whispers, the chaos. It all faded into silence. All he could hear was the sound of his daughter's pain. He stood up slowly, turned toward the crowd, and spoke, not to the staff, not to security, but to everyone watching, both in that terminal and across the internet. "When a company loses its soul," he said calmly, "it doesn't matter how many planes it flies." Every word was captured, live-streamed, and shared within seconds. He turned to the staff. "Effective immediately, all flights are grounded until we complete a full review of our internal conduct policies. Every single one of you represents this airline. And today, this airline failed." The gate agent tried to interrupt. "Sir, I was just following." Marcus raised a hand. "Following what? Policy or prejudice?" Silence. He turned to the supervisor. "Tell me, at what point did anyone here stop and ask themselves, what if this were your child?" No one answered. The cameras kept rolling. Passengers who had once complained about delays were now silent. Some were crying. Others clapped quietly, realizing they were witnessing something historic. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice. His authority was absolute, but his words carried a deeper power, truth. He looked back at his daughters. "We're going home," he said gently. And as they walked away from gate 27, the world outside was erupting. News outlets scrambled to confirm the story. Within an hour, hashtags like hashtag grounded for justice and hashtag twin girls incident trended across every platform. CNN ran a headline: Airline CEO halts operations nationwide after racial discrimination against his own daughters. Fox News questioned if it was an overreaction. Social media users were split, some applauding the bold move, others calling it corporate chaos. But no one could ignore it. By sunset, the entire country was talking about the man who had stopped an empire to protect his family. Inside the corporate headquarters, panic spread. Executives rushed into conference calls. Shareholders demanded answers, and PR teams drafted statements by the minute. "Sir, we're losing millions by the hour," said the chief financial officer on an emergency call. "Grounding every flight. This could cripple us." Marcus sat quietly in his office, his daughters asleep on the couch beside him. "Then let it cripple us," he said. "If the cost of decency is profit, then we've been making the wrong kind of money." There was silence on the line. Even his harshest critics couldn't argue with that. Outside the window, night descended over the grounded planes. Hundreds of them lined up, silent and still, like monuments to accountability. That image would become iconic. Rows of aircraft sitting motionless under a blood-orange sunset, captured by drone footage and broadcast across every network. For many, it was a symbol of justice. For others, a reminder of how fragile power could be when tested by morality. But for Marcus Hall, it was personal. He wasn't thinking about headlines or investors. He was thinking about two little girls who had learned, far too early, what it meant to be judged by skin before soul. He replayed the video over and over again, his daughter's small voices, the disbelief in their eyes. It tore through every wall of composure he had built as a CEO. That night, he made a promise, not to the board, not to the press, but to his daughters. That will never happen again. The next morning, the airline issued a formal apology, but Marcus rejected it. "An apology doesn't fix culture," he said. "Change does." He announced an internal overhaul, mandatory racial bias training, disciplinary action for all employees involved, and new diversity committee that would report directly to him. But he didn't stop there. He invited civil rights leaders, educators, and everyday travelers to a public forum broadcast live across major networks. The message was clear. This wasn't just about two little girls. It was about every passenger who had ever been made to feel lesser. By the end of that week, hundreds of letters and emails flooded in. Parents thanked him for standing up. Employees admitted they'd stayed silent about similar incidents. And somewhere in that ocean of responses, a message from a young flight attendant stood out. "Sir, I used to think change would come from protests in the streets. But maybe it starts right here, in the places we least expect, at the gates." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. Maybe grounding every flight wasn't a breakdown. It was a reset, a pause long overdue. For years, airlines had measured success by how high they could fly. Marcus Hall had reminded the world that true success is measured by how grounded we are in humanity. And as the first plane took off again days later, its engines roaring under the dawn sky, a quiet message appeared on every passenger's screen before takeoff, dedicated to Amira and Amina Hall, and to every child who deserves to belong. The world woke up the next morning divided, but awake. Across social media, the story had gone from a viral clip to a global conversation. Millions had watched the video of Marcus Hall, kneeling in front of his daughters, his calm voice breaking through the noise of an airport that had just witnessed history. In coffee shops, on morning shows, and in corporate boardrooms, everyone had an opinion. Some called him a hero, others called him reckless. But no one could ignore him. CNN opened with a bold headline: CEO halts flights over racial bias scandal. Fox Business countered: power or pride? Did Marcus Hall go too far? Meanwhile, hashtags flooded every feed. Hashtag grounded for justice. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag Hall decision. And for the first time in a long time, America wasn't arguing about a faceless corporation. It was arguing about values. Talk show hosts debated the implications. Some praised his moral courage. Others questioned whether one man had the right to cripple an entire industry, even for a righteous cause. But deep down, everyone knew this story wasn't just about airplanes or policy. It was about dignity. About the moment a father refused to let his daughters be humiliated by the system he helped build. Inside corporate America, the ripple effect was immediate. Other airline CEOs held emergency meetings. HR departments across Fortune 500 companies began reviewing their own discrimination protocols. Even government regulators quietly discussed whether bias training should be federally mandated for the travel industry. The world was watching a single man's moral decision turn into a nationwide reckoning. For Marcus, though, none of that mattered. Not yet. He had spent the last 48 hours at home, barely sleeping. His daughters had returned to school, and the media had camped outside his house, turning his quiet suburban street into a circus of flashing lights and satellite vans. He refused interviews. He turned off his phone. The noise of the world could wait. But the noise found him anyway. News anchors dissected every second of the viral clip, his expression, his words, even the tone of his voice when he said, "When a company loses its soul, it doesn't matter how many planes it flies." To millions, it was the most powerful corporate statement ever made. To others, it was corporate suicide. Stock prices dipped. Investors panicked. The board called for an emergency session. And for the first time, Marcus found himself being judged by the same company he had just held accountable. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. A dozen men and women sat around a sleek mahogany table, faces tight, papers spread out, legal advisors whispering in corners. "Marcus," began the chairman, "you've made your point. The world has heard you, but we've lost $300 million in 48 hours. You need to end this blackout." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, but his voice carried steel. $300 million, he said softly. "How much is a child's dignity worth?" The chairman exhaled. "This isn't about morality anymore. It's about survival." "Then maybe survival isn't what we should be fighting for," Marcus replied. The room fell silent. One board member, an older woman, finally spoke. "He's right," she said quietly. "We preach inclusivity, but we act like it's optional. Maybe this is what it takes to make it real." It was the first crack in the wall, the beginning of something bigger than business. Outside the corporate bubble, ordinary people were taking sides. A retired pilot wrote an open letter titled, "The Day My Industry Stood Still." It went viral overnight. In it, he said, "We've been trained to think of safety as mechanical, engines, checklists, procedures. But the real danger is moral negligence." Marcus Hall didn't ground flights. He grounded hypocrisy. Teachers used the incident as a classroom discussion on ethics. Churches mentioned it in Sunday sermons. Civil rights leaders cited it as an example of modern protest through leadership, not violence. But not everyone applauded. An opposing movement started forming online. #TooFarMarcus. Critics claimed the CEO had abused his power, that he weaponized emotion for personal reasons. Some even accused him of orchestrating the event to promote his image. Cable news thrived on the conflict. Split-screen debates ran nonstop. One guest praising Marcus's integrity, another calling him a dictator in a suit. Through it all, Marcus stayed silent. Until one evening, he appeared on national television for the first time. No entourage, no PR team, no teleprompter. Just him, sitting across from a journalist who didn't go easy on him. "Mr. Hall," she began, "people are calling you everything from a hero to a tyrant. What do you say to those who think you overreacted?" Marcus looked straight into the camera. "Overreaction," he said slowly, "is what people call it when they're not the ones being humiliated." The journalist paused. "But grounding every flight, didn't that hurt innocent passengers, your employees' economy?" "It did," Marcus admitted, "but so does silence. Every time discrimination happens and we look away, the cost is invisible, but it's there. My daughters paid that price. I made sure no one else would that day. The clip spread faster than any headline. Millions of parents share it with captions like, "This is what protection looks like." Even critics had to admit he spoke with conviction, not ego. Within days, the narrative shifted. Major newspapers that once questioned him began to reconsider. Editorials described his act not as corporate madness, but moral clarity. Then came the unexpected twist. A rival airline released a statement supporting Marcus's initiative, pledging to implement identical reforms. Soon, two more companies followed. Within a month, the FAA proposed new anti-discrimination standards inspired by the Hall Protocol. What started as one man's personal act of defiance had turned into policy reform. But amid the praise, Marcus remained restless. He wasn't celebrating. Because for him, this was never about winning. It was about healing. Late one night, he sat in his daughter's room, watching them sleep. The soft glow of a nightlight cast their shadows on the wall. Two little girls who had unknowingly forced a nation to confront its conscience. He whispered, "I stopped the planes for you. But maybe, just maybe, the world needed to stop too." The next morning, Marcus returned to his office for the first time since the incident. On his desk sat a single envelope with no sender. Inside, a handwritten note read, "My name is Evelyn. I was the gate agent. I'm sorry." Attached was a small photo of the twins smiling as they finally boarded the plane a week later. This time, with their father beside them. Marcus stared at the photo for a long moment. He didn't feel anger anymore, just understanding. Change wasn't about destroying people. It was about waking them up. He placed the photo on his desk, right beside a framed quote from his late mother. "Sometimes, God grounds your plans to remind you what really matters." Outside, engines roared again. Flights resumed. Life went back to normal, or at least a new version of normal. But something fundamental had shifted, not just in one company or one man, but in how a country talked about justice, family, and power. And for millions watching around the world, one image remained burned into their minds. A father in a suit, standing at an airport gate, holding the hands of his twin daughters, while the entire sky stood still. The moment the CEO, Marcus Ellington, stepped into the terminal, silence fell. The crowd that had been buzzing moments earlier, still recording on their phones, now froze. The same employee who had sneered at the girls just minutes ago suddenly went pale, recognizing him instantly. "Mr. Ellington, sir? I didn't know." Marcus didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on his daughters, Amara and Amina, both trembling, clutching their teddy bears, eyes wet from tears. He knelt down, gently brushing away a tear from Amina's cheek. "It's okay, baby," he whispered softly. "Daddy's here now." The girls buried their faces in his suit, sobbing. Around them, phones were still pointed, but no one dared speak. The quiet intensity in Marcus's voice carried more weight than any shout ever could. He stood up, slowly, with the precision of a man who knew every word he spoke next would be remembered. His calm was terrifying. He turned toward the airline supervisor. "Who authorized this?" The woman stuttered. It was just a misunderstanding. "Sir, they didn't have the—" "Don't finish that sentence." Marcus cut her off. His tone was low, but unyielding. "My daughters had valid tickets. First class. You question their legitimacy because they're black. Say out loud if I'm wrong." The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. The silence became heavier. The crowd could feel something monumental building beneath that calm exterior. Marcus took out his phone, pressed one button, and put it to his ear. "Ground control," he said quietly. "This is Ellington." "Yes, sir." The voice on the other end replied immediately. "I want all current flights under Skywing's management to hold position. Effective immediately." "Sir?" "All flights." "All flights," Marcus repeated, "until I say otherwise." The supervisor gasped. "Sir, that's thousands of passengers." Marcus turned to her. "Then they'll learn what it feels like to be stopped for no reason." Within minutes, the entire terminal lit up with red alerts. Across the country, planes waiting for clearance stayed grounded. Air traffic halted. Pilots received emergency messages from headquarters. News outlets began calling within seconds. Something unprecedented was happening. Marcus stood still as chaos erupted around him. He didn't raise his voice once. His daughter stood beside him, their small hands gripping his coat, not fully understanding what was happening, only that their father was there and he was unshakable. In the control tower, panic spread. "The CEO has frozen all operations," someone shouted. Executives were dialing him nonstop. One of them finally got through. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing? We got international flights ready for takeoff." "I'm preventing a bigger crash," Marcus interrupted. "Not of planes, but morality." There was silence on the line. He continued. "When a company treats two little black girls like criminals because they're sitting in first class, that's not a mistake. That's systemic rot. And it ends today." Meanwhile, on social media, the video had already gone viral. The clip showed two terrified girls, an angry staff member, and finally, the moment Marcus appeared, walking in slow, deliberate steps like justice itself taking form. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag grounded for justice. Hashtag sky wing scandal. Hashtag twin tears matter. Within 20 minutes, cable news picked it up. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all airing the same breaking headline. CEO grounds entire airline after racist incident involving his daughters. People everywhere were stunned. Some called him a hero. Others said he'd gone too far. But everyone agreed. No one had ever seen a CEO take a stand like this, risking billions to make a point that couldn't be ignored. Back at the terminal, the same employee tried to speak again. "Mr. Ellington, please, I didn't mean any harm." Marcus finally turned to her. "Do you have children?" She hesitated. "Yes, the boy." Then imagine him standing here, crying, and someone tells him he doesn't belong, not because of what he did, but because of who he is. She lowered her eyes, speechless. Marcus exhaled, looked at his daughters, and said softly, "Let's go home." By the time he exited the terminal, dozens of journalists were already outside. "Mr. Ellington, is it true you grounded every flight?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Every single one." "Why would you do something so drastic?" Marcus looked straight into the cameras. "Because sometimes the only way to make people listen is to make the world stop moving." The clip of that moment, his voice calm, steady, filled with both love and fury, became one of the most replayed videos in modern history. Inside corporate headquarters, executives scrambled. Analysts were screaming about lost revenue. Shareholders demanded explanations, but Marcus didn't care. For him, this was personal, and it was moral. He knew this wasn't just about two children being denied boarding. It was about every story that went unseen, every quiet humiliation brushed off with, "Maybe it was just a mistake." This was his line in the sand. And while chaos raged across the industry, one small video from inside the terminal, two little girls hugging their father as the airport went silent, began melting hearts around the world. Under the post, a comment went viral. "When a father makes the world stop for his daughters, that's not power, that's love with purpose." By the next morning, the entire nation was talking about Marcus Ellington, the man who grounded the skies, the father who stopped an empire for his daughters. The story had gone from viral clip to full-blown global debate. Every news anchor had an opinion. Every talk show was dissecting his every word. Some called him reckless. Others called him revolutionary. But no one could ignore him. On CNN, a commentator leaned forward and said, "You don't just shut down every flight in the country, not even for your children. That's emotional leadership, not corporate leadership." But another voice cut in. "No, that's moral leadership. He didn't do it for money. He did it to make people see the rot inside their own system." On social media, hashtags were flooding timelines. Hashtag grounded for justice had hit over 50 million views overnight. A clip of Marcus saying, "Because sometimes the only way to make people listen is to make the world stop moving," was trending in over 30 countries. Thousands of people were posting their own experiences. Black families denied service. Brown passengers randomly searched. Mixed-race kids told, "You must be lost." For the first time, millions were seeing that it wasn't just one father's fight. It was a mirror held up to a system built on quiet prejudice. Inside Skywing's headquarters, chaos had turned into fury. The boardroom was in meltdown. Executives pounded the table. Do you realize how much this costs us every hour? We're bleeding hundreds of millions. Marcus sat at the head of the table, calm as ever. Good. Maybe that's how much it should cost to face the truth. Marcus, this is suicide, shouted one VP. The media is already calling it the CEO meltdown. You're destroying our reputation. He looked up slowly. Our reputation was destroyed the moment my daughters were told they didn't belong. I'm just making sure the world sees it. A silence fell across the room. His calm was unnerving. It wasn't anger that scared them. It was conviction. An emergency board meeting was called that afternoon. Lawyers, shareholders, government liaisons, all demanding answers. The Federal Aviation Administration was on the line. Mr. Ellington, this is beyond corporate boundaries. National air traffic is at risk. You can't keep the skies closed. Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the grounded planes on the runway. He spoke quietly but firmly. I won't restart a single engine until every employee in this company goes through mandatory anti-bias training. Not a memo, not a statement, real human accountability. The room erupted. That's insane, someone shouted. You can't impose moral training on an entire workforce. Marcus turned. Then find someone else to lead this company, because I won't lead a system that humiliates children for existing. The silence that followed felt eternal. For the first time, the board understood he wasn't bluffing. Meanwhile, his daughters were home, sitting in the living room with their aunt. News cameras parked outside their house. Amina looked up at the TV. Daddy's in trouble, isn't he? Amara whispered. He stopped all the airplanes for us. Their aunt smiled gently. He didn't stop the planes, sweethearts. He stopped the world long enough for it to finally look at you. That line, overheard by a reporter, became another viral quote. Across the country, protests began forming at airports. Some people carried signs that read, "Grounded for justice." If it takes one man to stop the sky, what does that say about the ground we walk on? For many, Marcus wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a symbol of every parent who would watch their child be disrespected, of every employee afraid to speak up, of every person who ever thought their voice wouldn't matter. But not everyone celebrated him. Talk radio hosts mocked him. A CEO who thinks he's God, grounding flights like he owns the clouds. Some senators call for investigations. This is a national disruption caused by a single man's emotions, one lawmaker barked. Others whispered that Marcus had lost control. A major shareholder even filed a motion to suspend him. But when the vote came, something unexpected happened. Thousands of Skywing's employees signed an open letter to the board. We stand with Mr. Ellington. We are tired of being told to smile while ignoring the truth. Let the planes rest until we rise better. That letter hit the front page of the New York Times. The following day, Marcus appeared on live television. No teleprompter. No press team. Just him, raw, honest, and composed. He looked directly into the camera and said, "When you tell two 10-year-old girls that they don't belong in first class, you're not just questioning their tickets. You're questioning their worth. If grounding my own company is what it takes to remind people that every human deserves respect, then let the skies stay silent." It wasn't a speech. It was a statement, short, unpolished, but so deeply human that millions stopped scrolling just to listen. For the next 48 hours, the skies remained closed. The economy trembled. Rival airlines mocked him publicly, until their own black passengers began posting old stories, demanding accountability. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't standing alone. Other CEOs began releasing statements, scrambling to align with the movement. Brands that had stayed quiet now wanted to take a stand. But Marcus didn't post slogans. He posted only 3 words on his company's official account. "We begin within." That post reached 100 million views in under 6 hours. Late that night, Marcus walked to the hangars where hundreds of planes sat idle. The engines silent, like a moment of national pause. His assistant approached him. Sir, the board is begging you to reopen. Just one flight may be symbolic. Marcus shook his head. No, we don't move until we mean it. He looked up at the planes, their sleek metal bodies reflecting the moonlight. They've carried people across the world. It's time they carry integrity, too. His assistant nodded quietly. In that moment, it no longer felt like rebellion. It felt like rebirth. At sunrise, as reporters gathered again, Marcus stood on the tarmac with his daughters. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders and whispered, "You see those planes? They'll fly again. But this time, they'll fly differently." The girls smiled, unaware of how deeply those words would echo. The world had seen many CEOs apologize, but it had never seen one suspend an empire, not out of rage, but out of principle. And though critics still raged, the people, the millions who had watched, cried, and posted, knew one thing for sure. A father's love had grounded the skies, but in doing so, it had also lifted humanity a little higher. The third day arrived, and still, no Skywings plane had left the ground. The world had never witnessed silence like this. Airports from Los Angeles to London stood still. Travelers camped in terminals, journalists flooded the runways, and economists warned of financial storm. Yet amidst the noise of outrage and chaos, one thing became clear. People were listening. Across America, schools discussed the incident in classrooms. Teachers played the viral clip and asked their students, "What would you have done if you were the girls? Or if you were the father?" Conversations about race, privilege, and equality filled dinner tables. The story had stopped being about one airline. It had become a national mirror. Even the White House released a statement. What happened to those two little girls is unacceptable. Every institution, public or private, must confront bias in all its forms. For the first time in decades, the president called the CEO of a private company, not to scold him, but to understand him. That afternoon, Marcus walked into a televised press conference. Hundreds of reporters were waiting. The room felt electric with tension. He stepped up to the podium, the world watching. He began slowly. 3 days ago, I watched my daughters cry because someone decided they didn't belong. I've been in boardrooms, I've met presidents, I've flown across continents, but I've never felt smaller than I did in that moment. The room was silent. Cameras clicked softly. So I stopped everything. Because for years, I've watched other people's children be told the same thing. And I stayed quiet. Not anymore. He paused. This company will not restart operations until we build a new foundation. One that sees color not as a threat, but as a truth to be respected. Behind him, a screen lit up. It showed a new initiative, Project Horizon, a full-scale corporate reform program. Every employee, from pilots to executives, would undergo cultural empathy and anti-bias training. A new department, ethical operations, would be established to monitor discrimination complaints in real time. 10% of Skywing's annual profits would go to fund scholarships for underrepresented youth in aviation. He continued, "If we can fly people across the world, we can also help them see the world differently." That line struck like thunder. The reporters fired questions. "Mr. Ellington, do you regret grounding every flight?" He smiled faintly. "No, I regret not doing it sooner, not the grounding, but the awakening." Another asked, "What do your daughters think of all this?" He looked down, exhaled softly. "They just wanted to go to Grandma's house. Now, the world knows their names. I only hope it remembers their innocence, not their pain." That sentence made front-page headlines the next morning. Meanwhile, across the internet, the tone had shifted. What began as outrage had turned into reverence. A video surfaced showing Skywing's employees, cleaners, technicians, flight attendants, volunteering to attend a new training before being required. They said, "If he can ground planes for his children, we can stand for his cause." Even rival airlines began following suit. Delta, United, and American announced similar initiatives within 48 hours. For the first time, corporate empathy became a competitive standard. Not everyone was happy. Of course, stock prices had plummeted. The board faced lawsuits. Shareholders demanded Marcus's resignation. But he didn't flinch. He told them calmly, money rebuilds itself. Morality doesn't. The boardroom fell silent again. They'd heard that tone before, the same tone that had grounded their empire days ago. Then, one by one, the younger executives began clapping. It started softly, then spread. They knew this wasn't a crisis anymore. It was a turning point. That evening, Marcus returned home. The front yard was filled with reporters, but this time they were quiet, respectful. Amara and Amina ran up to him as he walked through the door. "Daddy, did they fix it?" Amina asked. He knelt down, smiling gently. "Not yet, but we're making sure no one else ever has to fix it again." Amara looked up. "Does that mean we can fly again?" He chuckled softly. "Soon, but next time we'll fly knowing everyone belongs." His wife, Layla, came forward and hugged him. She whispered, "You didn't just stop flights, Marcus. You changed direction." The next morning, Skywings released a new commercial, only 30 seconds long. No actors, no slogans, just footage of two little girls standing at a gate, holding hands, looking out at a rising sun. A single line appeared on the screen. "We pause to remember who we're carrying." The internet wept. The video crossed 200 million views in 24 hours. Airline politicians and families alike shared it, calling the most honest apology ever made by a corporation. That same day, flights resumed. Slowly, engines roared back to life. But the first to take off wasn't a commercial plane. It was a small, symbolic test flight carrying exactly 3 passengers, Marcus, Amara, and Amina. They boarded quietly. The entire airport applauded as they walked through the gate. Every staff member along the way, from janitors to captains, bowed their heads slightly as they passed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot turned and said, "Mr. Ellington, it's an honor to fly you and your family." Marcus replied softly, "No, Captain, it's an honor that you're flying for them." The engines thundered. The plane lifted. For the first time in 3 days, the sky was no longer grounded. It was alive. From above the clouds, Marcus looked out the window. The sun shimmered against the horizon, golden, endless, forgiving. His daughters leaned against him, sleepy but smiling. "Daddy, we're flying again," Amara whispered. He nodded, eyes fixed on the expanse outside. "Yes, we are, but this time we're flying right." When they landed, news broke that Marcus had donated his entire annual bonus, nearly $20 million, to fund diversity and safety programs for airline staff worldwide. The statement simply read, "This isn't charity. It's correction." People called him everything from a hero to a rebel, but to Marcus, he wasn't either. He was just a father who refused to let injustice pass quietly. In the following weeks, global aviation began to shift. Skywings became the first airline to publicly publish its employee diversity data. Racial complaints dropped by 80%. Customer trust soared beyond pre-incident levels. And for the first time, travelers began referring to Skywings not just as an airline, but as a promise in the sky. Marcus rarely gave interviews after that. When he did, he said little, but in one rare moment, he was asked what he hoped people remembered most from the event. He smiled faintly and said that it wasn't about flights. It was about faces. "My daughters reminded me that power means nothing if you don't use it to lift others. And sometimes, to lift people up, you have to ground everything else first." The camera zoomed in as he looked away, eyes glimmering with both pride and quiet exhaustion. The image became the closing shot of documentaries, lectures, and history lessons years later. Because what Marcus Ellington did wasn't just leadership, it was legacy. The next morning, Marcus walked into the gleaming glass headquarters of Titan Technologies, not as a contractor, not as a nameless coder, but as the company's new chief innovation officer. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted his name. And for the first time in his life, he didn't flinch at the attention. He stood tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, the same quiet confidence in his eyes that had guided him through nights on the streets. The billionaire CEO who had once ignored his emails now extended a hand in front of the world's press. "Marcus," he said, his tone respectful, You saved my company when we all gave up. You reminded us what true genius looks like. Marcus shook his hand, but didn't smile. He wasn't there for their applause. He was there to finish what he started. As the applause died down, the CEO whispered, "The world's watching. Say something inspiring." Marcus turned toward the cameras. The room went silent. "You all know my story," he began, his voice steady. "Homeless, invisible, ignored. But that didn't mean I stopped learning. I built software on broken laptops, wrote code by candlelight, and dreamed in data while sleeping under bridges. The truth is, genius doesn't wear a suit. It doesn't live in a mansion. Sometimes it's just someone who refuses to stop believing in what's possible, even when nobody believes in them." He paused. The silence was electric. Technology should be for people, not just profit. I've slept in shelters where kids code on cracked screens, dreaming of changing the world. Those dreams deserve a chance. So, from this day on, Titan will open its doors to those without privilege, without status, but with the will to build. We'll create an innovation program for the homeless, the forgotten, the unseen. Because potential doesn't disappear just because someone lost their home. The crowd erupted into cheers. Journalists typed furiously. But amidst the chaos, Marcus's eyes drifted to the back of the room, where a small group of kids in oversized hoodies stood watching him. Their eyes glimmered with the same hunger he once carried. He nodded toward them, silently promising, "You're next." Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his new office, his name etched on the glass door, his computer screens alive with lines of code. He could still hear the hum of the servers, the heartbeat of the company he had once saved from ruin. But he didn't feel triumphant. He felt grounded. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "This isn't success. This is the beginning." Then his phone buzzed. It was an email from Daniel, the young intern he had met weeks ago, the one who once mocked him. "Marcus, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I was wrong. About you, about what real worth means. You taught me more in one night than any degree ever could. If you'll let me, I'd like to join your new program. I want to build something that matters." "Daniel," Marcus smiled softly. He hit reply. "You're already part of it." He hit send, closed his laptop, and leaned back in his chair. The city lights flickered outside like binary stars. For the first time in years, he wasn't coding for survival. He was coding for change. Weeks turned into months. Under Marcus's guidance, Titan Technologies began transforming from a profit-driven giant into a purpose-driven powerhouse. Homeless shelters across the city were equipped with refurbished laptops, coding mentors, and small innovation hubs. The program was called Second Chance Code. Each week, Marcus visited those hubs himself. No cameras, no press. Just him and the people who reminded him of where he came from. He'd walk in with his old backpack still slung over his shoulder, filled with notebooks and spare chargers. He'd sit with the participants, teaching them how to debug, how to think logically, how to dream again. One evening, as he helped a young woman debug her first Python script, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "They said I was useless," she whispered. "Now my code runs." Marcus smiled. "So do you," he said. She laughed, and that laughter, small and bright, echoed across the room like the spark of something bigger. Months later, Titan Technologies made headlines again, not for a scandal or a merger, but for innovation born from the streets. A homeless teen named Jamal, one of Marcus's students, had developed an algorithm that optimized urban food distribution, reducing waste by 60% and feeding thousands. When journalists asked how he did it, Jamal simply said, "Marcus believed I could. That's all I needed." The world took notice. Governments wanted to copy the model. Companies wanted to sponsor it. And Marcus, now hailed as the homeless coder who rebuilt Silicon Valley's soul, refused to take personal credit. He just said, "The code works because the people who wrote it finally got a chance to." One quiet night, long after everyone had gone home, Marcus returned to the same park bench where it had all started. The same cracked concrete, the same flickering streetlight. But now there was something new. A small plaque, bolted into the bench, with these words engraved: in honor of Marcus Cole, who proved that brilliance can rise from anywhere. He sat down and ran his fingers across the words. He remembered the hunger, the cold, the rejection. And yet, none of that felt bitter anymore. It all made sense. Every line of pain had written the code of his destiny. A quiet laugh escaped him. "Guess they believe me now," he whispered. A gust of wind blew through the park, carried with it the faint echo of the past. The night he had sat here, invisible and forgotten, whispering ideas to the stars. He stood up, looked toward the skyline lit with innovation centers and labs he'd built, and whispered, "Now it's your turn." The screen fades black, but Marcus's voice remains. Every homeless coder, every invisible dreamer, every person told they weren't enough. Listen, you are not broken. You are building. Every hardship is just a line in your source code, waiting to compile into something beautiful. Don't wait for the world to see your worth. Show it, line by line, dream by dream. A pause, because one day, the same people who doubted you will ask how you did it. And you'll smile, not out of revenge, but out of gratitude, because their disbelief was your ignition. Soft piano fades in. The final image shows the skyline glowing with light, forming the shape of binary numbers that spell one word: believe. Then the screen cuts to black.